O Lord, uphold me, that I may uplift thee. Amen. I hope you notice the change between verse 20 and 21. There is a sudden turnabout from despair to hope. My soul is bowed down within me, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. There is a bridge from the despair of 20 and all that comes before it to the hope of 21. And we need to know how to cross over it. We need to know how to cross over because life sometimes depends on it. Life depends on it for the 10% of us today by statistics who are experiencing depression, making it hard to will ourselves out of bed in the morning, into public, into relationships or work. We need to find a way to cross over. We need to find a way to cross over because many of us have chosen to spend our lives in helping professions. And if you are not careful, you can find yourself depleted, overwhelmed by need, by what you see with your eyes and what you feel with your heart. We must find a way to cross over because the people in charge of our government have been transparent that flooding the zone with overwhelming news every week is part of their strategy for draining us of the energy to organize for what is right and just and true. And we need to find a way to cross over because it's World Communion Sunday and also Rowan's half-birthday Sunday. And the relationships that we have chosen to pursue as a congregation with native people of the land who have experienced broken promise after broken promise after broken promise. And with the people in El Salvador who've been offered the choice between murder and mayhem on the one hand and the strongman order of a corrupt autocracy on the other. And with the people of Cuba who languish hungry and forgotten by a blockade we have not been able to end. All those relationships take us to the edge of cynical fatalism where it is so easy to give up. I've met people who have given up before. I'm sure you have too. Sometimes I've met them on the street at the end of a bottle, or the end of a needle, or the end of a soup line. I've met them in a school where aggression or indifference can signal surrender to low expectations. I've met them in people who have resigned themselves to a life spent in pursuit of more stuff, more alcohol to numb the pain. I've met them in the weary eyes of those who've decided to give in to never finding work that is satisfying, or never nurturing a relationship to a healthy place, or never making the change they hope to see for themselves, much less for the community around them. There is a change between verse 20 and 21, a bridge from despair to hope. And we need to know how to cross over. Now, one way to cross over might be to just avoid the possibility of despair altogether. To keep yourself from ever reaching those depths, even and especially when you are the one who is suffering. Protect yourself from loss as much as possible. Stay away from the poor as much as you can. Shield yourself from violence as often as possible. There is a whole industry a whole industry of security systems and walls and guns and even real estate location, and insurance and cosmetics built partially or totally on this mitigation of risk, which in its perverse form is about avoiding loss. That's one way to avoid despair, to keep yourself from hurting, from being hurt by others, to censor your relationships to include only those with people and communities who appear to have no problems, who seem to be happy all the time. If avoiding pain doesn't work, you can always give up on hope altogether. What is hope, after all, other than a kind of campaign slogan? What is it really other than chosen naivete? Choosing ignorance over facts, choosing fantasy over nonfiction. Why not conclude, however harsh that it may sound, that some children are destined to be hungry? That the Indian reservations are not ever going to thrive, that some countries will never not be poor, that some kids are too old to be changed, are not worth wasting our time. Why not concede that you should settle for what you've got in your job or your chosen relationships or the hand you've been dealt in life? That there is no higher power to hear your complaints, to judge injustice, to change the world, or even your life? Why not give up on hope altogether and settle for a life spent getting as much for yourself as you can? Those are two ways to stay out of the pit of despair. People try it all the time. Ignore your pain or accept it as your lot in life. Forget anyone who does not make us happy or adjust completely to their unhappiness. Dismiss them or accept their suffering as their destiny. Close your ears when you hear about another sibling who's been disappeared in El Salvador or off the streets of Baltimore. Or don't let it bother you when you hear it. Close your eyes when you see a friend who is navigating a nasty relationship breakup, or just accept that it won't ever get better for them. Close your heart so you can't call to mind the people you know who even now are nursing the love of their life into death. Or callously tell them they should accept this suffering as the way things are meant to be. Those are two different ways to stay out of this pit, but they end up looking pretty much the same. Don't allow yourself to suffer, which is to say, don't allow yourself to love, which is to say, don't allow yourself to be fully human. And while I know that some people have learned to live life this way, there are too many people in this place who refuse to adjust to that kind of living. Who, in the words of Dr. King, are maladjusted to some parts of contemporary living, maladjusted to a world that turns too quickly to violence to solve our problems, maladjusted to politics as win-lose sport that tears so many people down, maladjusted to oppression, whether it is located in the mountains of Central America or on the Facebook pages of hurtful, homophobic campaigns, or military on the streets of Chicago, ripping families apart along with our Constitution. You are maladjusted to schools that fail children, or a gun industry that keeps putting weapons on our streets, or foreign policy that cares nothing about the humanity of anyone other than the engorged pockets of those in charge. You are, as Dr. King said, as maladjusted as Jesus of Nazareth, who dreamed the dream of the parenthood of God and the brotherhood of man, of people. So what do we do then in this global church when our hearts are torn by the injustice of inequity? A word that, by the way, is still in our Bibles, whether it's on the current government censorship list or not. What do we do in this city when our hearts break, when a child we know is cut down by a gun or a needle or by a family who doesn't care? What do we do when we ourselves slip from security into that pit? When it's our life that fills up with suffering, when it's our future whose sustenance has dried up, what do we do in this missional congregation, this community of doers, when need or pain or heartache cannot be fixed with our intelligence or our commitment or our resources? What do we do then? The poet in Lamentations brings private pain into public. They bring private pain into public. He voices what he sees. She tells how her heart breaks like teeth grinding on gravel, cowering in the ashes, a soul bereft of peace. The poet crafts their lament literally. If I could show you this book in the Hebrew, you'd see that every new line of poetry begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is as if the poet spills out her anguish for herself and for the world around her from A to Z. And you do not spend that kind of time on anything unless you recognize it as something valuable. Something that is worth your time, worth your energy to articulate from yourself into and with the community. The poet picks up the pen and spills it out, and somehow this leads to hope in God's steadfast love. Somehow this act of voicing your pain, or the pain that you see around the world in the favelas and the shanty towns and the refugee camps and the war zones, foreign and domestic, somehow the act of voicing that, even and especially, get this, when you cannot do much more, it leads you and other people somewhere else. The truth is, I'm not sure the poet even knows how or why this happens, how verse 20 leads to verse 21, but I think it has something to do with a God who always hears the cries of suffering people. From the slavery of Egypt to the horror of Calvary, God is faithful to people who are in pain. In Hebrew, the word that translates Wait can also be translated hope. That is a hard word. That is a hard word, but an important one to remember in times when the world is off kilter for you or for many. It takes time. It takes time to meet God in the heart of despair, just as surely as it takes time for us to work it through our soft bodies. But our voices always make a difference. I don't just mean politically. In fact, I mean that our voices make a difference even when they fall on the deaf ears of the current powers that be. Those words of poets hewn out of the suffering of exiles, the hell of slavery, the crucible of heartache, they make a difference to God, who hears the cries of those around the world and right here who voice their suffering. God's great faithfulness, mercy, and love have a proven track record of meeting them, of meeting us. In the center of that despair, with enough bread to take us through the day, enough wine to bring us a small bit of cheer, a sure reminder of the immense power that is in our hands and the hands of others when we share life together.